What's up everyone, PocketFlip here for my very first Civ 6 tips and tricks video. So I'm going to do a number of these, ranging from various victory types to various smaller scale in-game strategies such as war, or territory expansion, or diplomacy, sort of stuff like that. This particular video is about the culture victory, so I've composed a list of things that I consider to be of greatest concern when pursuing a victory through tourism. But yeah, let's start things off with a bonus tip. How about that? So I'm going to start every one of these videos with a bonus tip. The bonus tip doesn't get its own number because it may be just a duh to some of you, but I feel like it's information that I would be doing an injustice by missing. The Culture Victory's bonus tip is to stay peaceful. Staying peaceful in a culture game will make your life just so much easier. You don't have the time or production to worry about building units, not to mention the just concrete bonuses that you get from being able to get open borders and trade routes with other civs. This can easily double your tourism effectiveness. Obviously, it's not always possible to stay peaceful, but I recommend avoiding war at all costs, especially post-Renaissance era when it just gets way too tedious. Alright, so with that off my plate, let's get into the real tips. Tip number 10 is to build settlements early and often. So you're going to need a lot of theater square buildings to store all the great works necessary for a culture victory. So I highly recommend that after you build a scout and maybe another unit in the early game to help defend your capital, that you immediately churn out a couple, if not several, settlers right away. Expanding also gives you more tiles to build seaside resorts and ski resorts upon, and it's just good to lock down land early so that you can, as I stated in my bonus tip, stay peaceful and not have to declare war to take land. It's just hugely convenient. Tip number 9 is to settle near mountains or on the coast. It can be a bit of an oversight in the early game where you should definitely just settle in the location with the best yields. But it's important to be mindful, especially with your next few cities, of the tiles that you can receive tourism yield from in the future. These include seaside resorts, which you can build on grassland, desert, or plains coasts, and ski resorts, which you can build on any mountain tile that's not adjacent to another ski resort. Additionally, settling near a coast allows you to explore more via naval units and potentially send trade routes further. And settling near mountains is always just a good idea, as it provides really good defense from your neighbors and nice district adjacency. Tip number 8 is to build a scout first. Maybe you always build a scout first. For me, it's between a scout, a slinger, or a second warrior. But in a culture game, a scout is especially good. Early exploration allows you to be the first to meet city-states, which gives you a free envoy, and this is huge. You'll hear me talk more about envoys later, but you also find tribal villages, which can yield relics or other early game advantages, builders, gold, etc. Natural wonders are always a good find, and you also meet other civs, which helps you understand what land you can expand into and what land you should sort of concede to the other guys. Tip number 7 is to build a campus first, before pursuing a theater square. It can be easy to think that rushing drama and poetry in the theater square district is the best move, as in a science game you can often just neglect theater squares altogether, but that's really not the case in a culture game. There are certain technologies, which we'll specify later, that are super important for your success with tourism, and it's really hard to win being behind in science, really for any victory type. But the campus also can be reached much faster than the theater square, so it's not super inconvenient to build one first, and it's good to give your civ a reasonable science foundation. Tip number 6 is to get great rider points as soon as you possibly can. I know this is sort of contradictory to the previous tip, but especially if you're in a game with a strong culture civ like Pericles or French Eleanor, it's imperative to generate great rider points as soon as you can. Getting your first theater square and amphitheater built is of the utmost importance. Great works of writing are often the first bits of tourism you can get, and there are several bonuses throughout the game that make them more potent, including giving you a science bonus. But you can easily fall behind as somebody with more amphitheaters and theater square districts than you that are just getting way more great rider points, so I highly recommend that you work towards getting those great rider points as early as you can. Tip number 5 is to be efficient with ENVOYS. Suzerain abilities can be super strong for a culture victory. Certain city-states provide you with extra science, or production, or unique builder improvements that can yield tourism and otherwise. It can be super enticing to spend your invoice sort of willy-nilly to get slightly better yields, but I would highly recommend saving them until you can become the suzerain. Not to mention the air score that you get from becoming suzerain first. Again, city-states whose unique bonuses allow you to build a culture improvement. I think that's like Moai, and Alcazar, etc. There's several. Those are great. Also, city-states that boost your science, especially the one that boosts your science from great works of writing. Those are the best ones to get. So, but yeah, just become suzerain of everyone. That's your goal. Tip number 4 is to build harbors and commercial hubs. Gold, as always, is very important for a culture victory, particularly in the late game when you can purchase buildings to store your overflowing great works. Although you can partially compensate for gold with faith, it's generally much more reliable to use gold, as I find commercial hub districts to be more versatile than holy sites in that they give you trade routes. Yeah, like commercial hub markets and harbor lighthouses give you additional trade routes, which allow you to send trade routes to all the opposing civs, which increases your tourism output to that civ. Yeah, it's really strong. I highly recommend sending trade routes everywhere, and the only way you can really get to the trade route capacity that you'll need to send a trade route everywhere is to build commercial hubs and or harbors. Tip number 3 is to build archaeological museums in high production cities. So now we're sort of getting into the minutiae of things, but I think this is kind of an important one that isn't super intuitive. It can be difficult to decide whether to build archaeological museums or art museums. You will inevitably get great artists, and you need a place to store great works of art. But alternatively, if you have a robust empire, there will likely be several antiquity sites and or shipwrecks within your empire or nearby, so it's good, I think, to have a balance of the two museum types. I recommend, in this case, building the archaeological museum in your cities with high production. That way you can reasonably produce an archaeologist without having to purchase one, because they're like 1,600 gold, and it's super unreasonable. On standard speed, that is. For tip number 2, I'm going to give you your essential techs for a culture victory. First of all, flight. Flight is conditionally the most important tech that you can get when going for a culture victory, because what it does is convert every tile yield in your empire that is producing culture, which you don't even need to be working in. So it can be one of the unique improvements that you get from the city-state suzerainty, or it can be if you have like God of the Open Sky and get culture from your pastures, that counts. Some of the luxuries just give you culture, that counts. All those things get converted into tourism, whether you're working them or not. Flight is huge, can give you a huge tourism boost. Number 2 is printing. Printing is imperative for early tourism, and can be easily forgotten. I almost always forget to research printing because I'm so focused on flight, but it's super important because it doubles the tourism that you receive from great works of writing, which are generally your first tourism generators, and you often have a good number of great works of writing by the time that you can research printing, so it's pretty good. Number 3 is radio. Radio, pretty straightforward, introduces great musicians, and the broadcast tower, which stores great works of music. But also seaside resorts become buildable, and that's what you've been settling land on the coast for, is to build your seaside resorts. The 4th technology, and the last one that I consider to be super imperative, is computers, which you should get just right after you get radio. It's most prudent to rush computers right after. What it does is it doubles all your tourism throughout your civ. You don't often get it until the late industrial, at the earliest, often the modern or even the atomic era, but it's a huge late game swing in terms of tourism. And finally, tip number 1 is to not be afraid to trade your great works. So it may seem super counterintuitive to trade tourism yielding resources in a game where you're trying to generate as much tourism as possible. And a lot of the time it's honestly not advisable to trade your great works. But the AI tends to value them very highly, and often the gold or a resource that can set you forward several turns, like a strategic resource, is a lot more valuable than a single great work, which gives you like 2 tourism per turn in the early game. Especially if you're running low on slots, it's great. Alternatively, it can sometimes be prudent to trade for opponents' great works, particularly if one of them would theme a museum or provide a bonus to your tourism generation. So yeah, if you are searching for another landscape painting, for example, and you've got two from two different artists and you can outsource one of them, that's great. It's pretty good to trade for, you can often swap one for one great works that can theme museums for you. So yeah, would highly recommend considering the trading of your great works. So yeah, thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you learned something new, or at least are thinking about the process of going for a culture victory a little bit differently now. Let me know in the comments what kind of strategies you abide by when generating tourism. I'd love to hear all your tricks as usual. Otherwise, I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.